All right. Yeah, it's just it's funny too because if I cared about people watching the videos, I'd pick up these things that just go around and around, like the libertarian arguments and the feminist arguments and abortion. And the thing is, it's just annoying. You guys just don't get it. You talk about the same unsolvable, you know. Yeah, but how many angels do go on the head of a pin? Well, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, but how many do? Well, it doesn't have any bearing on what we're talking about. But I want to know. People tell us this is the question. They've said this was the question. You don't know the subject. Look, libertarians. I spend a lot of time trying to look for fundamentals. So there'll be a lot of elements I'm considering, and I'm like, which one's more fundamental? And it's not like divining. You don't just pick up the thing and go, ooh, when I think about this, it feels really heavy. God must be the most fundamental because I feel the most deep when I think about it. No, it's a real simple technical thing. Can you write a sentence defining one of the terms using the other ones? And often you can, and you can do it both ways. Then you have both statements. Then you can keep looking at those statements. I'll give you an example. Light and dark. You can define light as an absence of darkness and darkness as an absence of light. You keep going, looking. You might have to add some other definitions like of substance, material substance, and then once you've captured dark in a box, you apply the material substance definition. See, is there anything there? No. So it's the absence, and you figured out which of those statements. The darkness really is a concept just that has to do with light and gradation, the negative space of light, right? You cannot put human rights in terms of property rights. You can't you can't come up with a way to state that slavery should be illegal if a person's body is their property. And when a person's body is not their property and you think, oh, he's saying it's somebody else's property. No, it is not property at all. A 14-year-old can't own a 40-year-old. An 18-year-old, just at the age, or 21-year-old at the age of majority, cannot make a decision for the 50-year-old as if the 50-year-old is their property. They can make a decision what they do with themselves, and that'll impact the 50-year-old. But they can't do it like, and I'll take some money and get a lobotomy and you'll be the slave. I mean, you cannot put human rights. On the other hand, you can put property rights in terms of human rights. You can define property rights where the human rights go in the sentences that do the defining. Right? Because you cannot go about your human existence, your right to pursue happiness, if you cannot have any property whatsoever. That's my belief. Okay, but it does not work the other way around. And another thing that just bugs me is just the market of nation things is just that I have asked libertarians to do this thought experiment and it's too effective. They don't want to try it even once. It's too effective. You can't look at the problem the same once you actually visualize this. But I'm trying to think of new ways to say. I'm frustrated. Let's say you are a Mexican citizen and you're unhappy with the government down there. And it's 2050, and luckily the United States has gone full-on libertarian. As much as it can, though, I guess it's got a border of some sort, just so it knows if you're in it. Of course, it wouldn't stop anybody coming in. It's all privatized, and now you have to come there. Is that just going to be for free? I mean, all the people in there have joined together. They privatized the road, and the road company is now charging fees for people that want to go on that road. And the water company, everybody is charging fees to use the stuff that the government used to charge taxes to do. So you're going to have to pay that. So you're welcome to come and go as you like, but you have to pay. What is the difference? If everybody in the United States wanted to create this kind of a co-op than we could. And when we started the country, we basically established we wanted to form it, a kind of an organization that had an internal ruling body that decides a lot of things, that did decide them. And even if the country has become what those founders didn't want in the instance of the government, it got there by the methodology they put in place. It's not our fault if they didn't understand where that system led. We are able to change that system. We can vote for reducing the fees, aka taxes, and the infrastructure, or we can choose to do the opposite. And you can just decide whether you come into our country or not. And if you're born here and you inherit your right to be in the country, automatically accepted in the American country club, you don't get to change the rules. You don't get to say, I want to live in the pool house and I'm going to piss in the pool and swim in the toilet. It's not your property. You're paying a fee. And when you argue against these kinds of things, you don't even see that you're going, there's an inalienable human right of something. And it happens naturally on its own. And why doesn't it happen on its own? Because there's people stopping it. Well then, if we just let it on its own, won't people stop it again? No, if we let it on its own, it'll happen. Then why didn't it happen? Because it wasn't left on its own. Well, who exactly was interfering with it? People. It's fucking insane. And I do consider myself a libertarian because I believe in individual sovereignty. I believe that's the goal. But it's something we're inventing. You need a platform. You know, the so-called state of nature we use in classical Western philosophy a lot. You know, it only seems free if you idealize it, some anecdotes, and because you have no single thing that fetters all your freedoms. It's disease and predators and the weather and all of these things it impact your actual freedom. But since it's not like one dictator that you go, look, they weren't free because there was, Pinochet. So the animals in the jungle were more free. Well, not necessarily. There could be a drought in the jungle. There could be all kinds of things. And also it breaks down to individually as well as the overall statistical situation. But the state of nature is definitely not what we're talking about, where an individual is going to survive, because to survive in the state of nature, humans need to band together. So it's not for the individual. And they say, it takes a village. Well, I think villages and like close-knit families, they're lovely, but they're also not individualistic. They pass judgment on every little thing. How you cut your hair. There's some families, of course, are individualistic, but it doesn't automatically tend towards that. These small groups that you have to form in the state of nature. So forming large groups, large urban groups, that's what frees people up. And there's an irony there. The people in the city, they're more dependent kind of on the culture and the services of the city, and yet they are often more independent thinkers within that realm, because you're not as beholden to every little thing. If your neighbor doesn't like your haircut, it doesn't mean you can't get a job. And individuality and the ability for an individual to operate in a market, that's something that's structured. It's like wanting to play a game and refusing to have rules. Well, in playing a game, Monopoly or Illuminati or whatever, that is saying, I want to adopt these rules for a while under this circumstances. Doesn't mean you won't quit the game or change game or what, but it's adopting those rules. And so we're seeking the rules that fetter only what either needs to be or what we want fettered, like, infant mortality, and produces this platform upon which we can agree to disagree, have positive collaborative disassociations, and so on. Thinking that freedom is not having a system, not having a methodology, is not having an organic organization, that's just childish. It's just naive. now who said this? Jeez, I was just about to quote somebody. I think it's shit. Okay, let me look. Sorry, excuse me. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm sorry. Anyway, somebody was saying that Marx himself knew that the communist states would fare poorly against competing against capitalist nations. I don't know about that, but let's just take that for the sake of argument. Well, first of all, then it would be stupid for him to do the first international and take part in the creation of communist revolutions, because then you'd have, if it succeeded, communist nations in the wrong era when they're competing against capitalist nations that are still strong. And it'll make communism look weak. And in that context, it would be weak. So, that was a mistake. And two, I don't think the Soviet Union was that communist state. The Soviet Union did not keep the Soviet system, and you can look it up unless you're ignorant. And it seemed more like a single capitalism to me. It seemed more like a monopoly capitalist state. So I think if Marx had wanted to work for his ideas to help him move, then he shouldn't have worried about governments at all. He should have just tried to create or change the governments enough that you would be allowed to create, produce your own businesses. You know, like Mondragon. Again, if you don't know what Mondragon is, then you're ignorant. That's what he should have done. Then when the capitalists were all collapsing and weak, and they would be ready to continue to survive. And they wouldn't have to use violence because the capitalists take themselves out and the producer co-ops weather the storm. Okay. Now the final thing, though, is, okay, given the kind of state that the Soviets did become, was it successful? How did they fare? Well, I think that you wouldn't even know who Russia was if they hadn't done that. If they hadn't pooled their resources in their massive central economy, they wouldn't have been a world power marked in history the way they are now. It just wouldn't have happened. So ironically, that state, I think it's bad for the Russian people. I wouldn't want to be a Russian person with that state, just like I'm not happy being an American person with the American version of global, sustained, medium temperature war. So I wouldn't advocate the kind of way the Soviet Union ran things, but I think it definitely increased their world power. So the power, not necessarily of the people inside to accomplish, but the power of that group to be one of the spacefaring nations and nuclear nation and all that stuff. So anyway, just some ideas, my take on things. What do you all think, all you Sovietologists? I think Condoleezza Rice is one of my subscribers. What do you think, Condoleezza? I know you're an expert in this matter.